So last week we had Jesus returning to his hometown of Nazareth and quoting from the prophet Isaiah, a messianic prophecy, and then pronouncing that the prophecy had been fulfilled, declaring that he was the Messiah. And the hometown people seemed to approve. Then this week, he says, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown. He tells some of the works of the prophets Elijah and Elisha, and of how they were able to help isolated sufferers and Gentile sufferers at that, but by no means could they help all the people who were suffering. And this was not what the people of Nazareth, I guess, wanted to hear. They wanted him to do a miracle or two and tell them what wonderful people they were. So the sympathetic crowd who turned out to hear a local boy who had become a bit of a celebrity, this sympathetic crowd suddenly became an angry lynch mob. They drove Jesus from town, intending to kill him. And what does Jesus do? He simply walks away and continues his ministry in the next town down the road. Such is the fickle nature of human emotion. One moment Jesus is a hero, maybe even the Messiah, and the next moment they run him out of town and try to throw him off the edge of a cliff. For what? For saying he won't do any miracles? For suggesting the audacity that maybe God would save Gentiles as well as Jews? This crowd seems to have overreacted a little bit to a sermon involving a biblical interpretation that Jesus offers. Rather than discussing why they disagree with this particular interpretation, they decide instead that Jesus must die, and he must die right now. Do you think they might have been overreacting just a little bit? Today we have also heard the love chapter from the first letter of Paul to the church in Corinth. By the way, in the hundreds of weddings I've done over the years, 90% of them included this love chapter, just so you know. It's a favorite of weddings. But let's recall part of the text. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. You know, I think that angry mob in Nazareth would have benefited from hearing Paul's letter, don't you think? Love is patient. Love is kind. That's not always easy, is it? Being patient is not always my natural reaction to life. So I have to practice patience, hoping that with practice I will find perfection. Being human, there are things that irritate me. When Sherry seems to be taking forever to get ready to go somewhere, I get a little bit upset. But over the years, I've learned to be patient, to close my mouth, and if I have to, go out and sit in the car and wait, to not express my irritation. And the reality is, you know, we're rarely late anywhere. Rarely. There's those exceptions that I always remember, I guess. When I walk in our parish kitchen and I find dirty dishes all over the place, it really bugs me. It feels disrespectful. But I wait until those initial emotions pass before talking to someone in that group who left the mess. It is possible to speak the truth in love without all that emotion, if we learn to be patient. In this morning's gospel, Jesus does not immediately chastise this group from the synagogue who decides that he must die. He simply walks away, no doubt waiting for another day when the emotions are not running so high. He is patient. We must be patient and not feel we have to immediately respond to those things that others do that bugs us. That is an expression of love, I think, to be patient. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that to be loving means that we let everything slide. There are certain situations that require our strong and immediate actions. Abusive relationships demand our quick response for the sake of the abuser and the abused both. And it is not loving to ignore someone who is falling into the disease of addiction. That's another example of a situation when it would actually be unloving to simply walk away. But in regards to many of the little things that irritate us in our day-to-day lives, I think we might try to be a bit more patient, to be a bit more kind in the ways that we respond to those things and those people who bug us. Love is not rude. It does not insist on its own way. One of the things I think that we have to consider is maybe love is not an emotion. I don't think it is. In the way that Paul is speaking of love, he's using the term agape. Agape love refers to the love of God for us. Agape love is divine and unconditional and self-sacrificing love. In other words, in this case, when talking about agape love is not an emotion. It is a choice. Let me explain that. There used to be a member of my family who I really did not like. And I had good reasons not to like this person. But it got to the point where I knew that I had to figure out a way to love this person if I wanted to or not. And I just couldn't do it. So I spoke to a wise woman about this problem. And she said, well, maybe if you start acting like you love the person, maybe eventually you will. In other words, she was suggesting fake it till you make it. And that felt weird, and it actually felt a little dishonest to me. But this woman, I had a lot of respect for this woman. She had helped me before. So I decided to take her advice. And so I faked it. I responded as if I loved that person, when actually the emotion I had was I couldn't stand the person. But I responded as if I loved this person for a few years. And an amazing thing happened. After a few years, my emotions finally caught up with my actions. And I realized that I really did love this person. Sometimes love is a choice. It's not a feeling. Let me tell you one more story. One of my daughters was a delightful little girl, but she had occasional displays of stubbornness and rebellion, much more than her siblings did. Well, when she became a teenager, there were no longer any occasional displays. She was a rebellious teenager all the time. Being a bit stubborn myself, my daughter and I had numerous, daily, confrontations. By the time she turned 18 and moved out, we rarely spoke to one another. Years of all these confrontations and the resentments they had caused made the hope of any normal relationship with my daughter a very vague hope. About a year after she moved out, she ended up in a very difficult situation, and I knew I could help her, and I knew she wouldn't ask for my help. My first response to say, well, maybe it's time for her to learn one of those life lessons, the whole tough love thing. But another part of me, remember the little girl who used to crawl up on my lap and plead with me to read a story to her. Well, in the end, love won out. I showed up at her apartment. We had a long talk. We shouted at each other. We cried. But in the end, she decided to let me help her. She accepted my offer of help, and she even moved in with us for a while. And the next few months were very difficult. But we tried to set our differences aside. And we try to just love each other, nothing else. Just love each other. And you know what? It worked. We got through that crisis together. And our relationship was healed. Shortly after that, I had to move away. And so we never spent a lot of time together after that particular crisis. But in 12 years, we have never had another heated conversation. She is now married and has 2 children of her own. She lives out in Idaho. And just the other night, she called me to let her know how her family was doing and to let me know that she loved me. If we hadn't have had that crisis, if I hadn't given in, I probably would not have a relationship today with my daughter. I hope my daughter learned a few positive things from me over the years, but I also hope that she realizes the important life lesson that she taught me. Sometimes in relationships, being right or wrong doesn't really matter too much. Neither does our level of anger or stubbornness. In the end, if the relationship is one that we value, we will allow love to trump all. As Paul wrote to the Corinthians, and now faith, hope, and love abide, these 3, and the greatest of these is love. Let us choose to love one another as God first loved us. Amen.